Thanks for coming to the 2020 Great Lakes Judging Center annual seminar. And due to a lot of circumstances, we're pretty excited just to present a couple hours to everyone. Dave Miller, I'm your host for today. And I'm a member of a number of orchid societies and the Judging Center. So there's a couple things that I would like to say. First of all, Rob already stated it, but I'm going to restate it. We would like to ask you that if you're not speaking, make an effort to mute yourself, because even if you're not speaking, if the dog is running around or the clock is clocking, we get feedback. So thank you if you would do that. So we're going to end right at 1 o'clock. So we have a pretty tight schedule. I'm not sure we're going to use all the time, so we'll have time for questions. And I'm sure that the way we have this set up, that you'll be able to ask questions as we go along. So if we fall a little bit behind, well, it doesn't really matter. The point of all this is we thought that it was a good idea, instead of what we had planned for our original live seminar, that we would try to help out the societies that we support, because most all of us are not having meetings yet. So it's been very difficult for us to recover from spring recruiting and build bonds with the new members that we have and our newer members from previous years early. So we thought that taking care of your orchids was a very good game plan for us to help people out. And our goal today is, none of this is original material. So I have a handout I'm going to send out to everyone, make available. You can download it. But we're going to show you where to find this information on your own. So after we're all done today, you'll still be able to go out and explore on your own. So anyhow, Dennis, is there anything you would like to say as the chair of the Judging Center?
Well, since this is our monthly meeting, I'd like to say we are open. Looks like we got a crowd, and that is great. I appreciate everybody coming out. As Dave said, that's why we opened it up broader than just the judges, because communicating with Ewans are what makes this whole thing work. I'd like to thank, obviously, Dave for heading this up, Mei-Ling and Rob for putting effort in and doing the program for us. Now, one other item that you folks aren't aware of, which is fine, it's an administrative thing. I'd like to thank Katie, because she did the awards last meeting. And of course, AOS has to have it in a certain format. And she was kind enough to do that for me. And so we can get that in as a group. And so special thanks to her. She did an excellent job in doing that. And by the way, I'm spastic, and I am doing my steps as we're doing this. So you see my head bopping around. That's what's going on. So just ignore it. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Dave, and let's get this thing going.
All right, so following protocol, there you go. Dennis is on it. He muted himself now that he's done. So we're really going to try to keep this quiet in the background. I resent the agenda file, and I can still share that here, I think. There we go. Everybody get that? Or no?
Yes, we're seeing it.
Okay, great. I distributed that. If you go to your chat window, you should be able to download it. But you see we have a pretty simple format. we're going to stick to this and give you as much information as possible. Okay, there we go. I'm running 3 monitors here, so, you know, just working through it. All right, well, I guess I'm pretty much ready to go. So our first speaker is going to be Mei-Ling Clemens, and she is going, well, let me back up for a minute. We decided, or maybe I decided, that the best way to distribute this information is to utilize all the wonderful material on orchid care compiled and publicly available via the St. Augustine, Florida Orchid Society website. It is an amazing resource. And so we're going to walk people through that. So for your own personal benefit, but also for those of you who find yourself in the position where you're advising other members and other people about how to take care of their orchids. This is a great place to point them. So our 2 presenters are going to focus on pests and then also diseases and maybe environmental problems too if we have time. So here's Mei-Ling.
Okay, so I need to share my screen, right? So
Yes, you do. You should be able to.
I got this host disabled attendee screen sharing.
You need to make her a co-host, Dave.
No, that's not true, though. That isn't
Yeah.
true.
It's the only way I've ever been able to make it work.
All right. Well, I don't want to hold up progress here. So let's see. If I find Mei-Ling and her little 3 dots.
You can assign her as a host.
And that's what I did.
Okay, oh, there we go.
All right. Thank you, Rob.
Share. All right. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. So just a little bit of information. I'm a Florida girl. I grew up in Florida, and St. Augustine is actually only an hour and a half from where my parents are and where I went to college. And so don't feel like St. Augustine is so far south that they don't grow like us. St. Augustine is actually above the frost line. So when it comes to cultural stuff, they would be also applicable. So that's just a side note for all of you guys, because Gainesville is also above the frost line. And so, you know, my mom is putting orchids into a greenhouse come winter and all that because they do freeze. But like Dave said, we wanted to show you things on the St. Augustine Orchid Society, and I signed up to do the orchid pests. And so if you look under problems, you will see the different areas where this information is located. I'm going to pop over to the overview. And with the overview, there's actually quite a few different information you can see, from the orchid pests, applying chemicals, pesticides, and so forth. The first top 4 entries are actually have presentations, and the orchid pests and diseases essentially comes up with a presentation where all the information that I'm showing to you today is also located as well. So this is something that you can actually download if you want to, or maybe that's what Dave is going to be sending to everybody. But it's a thorough presentation. It's like 57 pages long. Okay. One of the things I'm going to do today is actually go down to the orchid pests, which is that same information except it's on the web pages. And we will go from there. One of the things I wanted to point out, and this is an immense resource right here, is if you pop, let me go back, if you go into, click on this link that says insecticides and miticides, it comes up with this table. Oh, that's my table. This wonderful table which is a valuable resource. And so there's obviously a lot of treatments, a lot of pesticides that are out there on the market. And this is 6 pages worth of information of different pesticides and miticides that are out there. And so if you wanted to find information about that, this is a great spreadsheet to actually look at. Not only does it have the information, it's like what type of chemical, like for Bayer products, depending on the concentration that you've purchased. If you're doing the 1.747%, then it tells you what the application rate would be for teaspoons per gallon, if it's something you should spray versus drench. And from what I can tell in the terminology they use in the website, drench essentially means that you're not only spraying the plant down, but you're also putting the pesticide into the potting mix as well, so that the potting mix and the roots are also getting that pesticide application as well. They tell you about the mobility of it, this IRAC. For those of you who are not familiar with that, IRAC is the Insecticide Resistance Action Committee, and it's the mode of action group. Essentially, all of these pesticides act a certain way to these pests, rather if it's a growth inhibitor or if it blocks certain parts of the nervous system. So that's what essentially kills them. That information is there. So you can actually go on to, you can Google that, and there is a table out there on the IRAC website. And then all the X's basically indicate that this pesticide is effective for that particular pest. So for instance, for the imidacloprid variety of pesticides, scale, mealybugs, thrips are suppressed, whiteflies, and so forth. So
I disagree with the thrip suppression. It doesn't work for that.
Thrips are pretty tough, so we can have a separate discussion on that for sure. But yes.
While I'm interrupting, one thing many of you have heard me say is you need to mix your modes of action. And what I mean by that is if you look at that IRAC group 4A, 1, 3, whatever, if you're going to mix 2 pesticides together, you want to choose them from different categories. So don't do 2 number 1s. It's not going to do you any good. The reason you mix them is because insects can't develop resistance to 2 things at once.
Right, and I was going to suggest also if you are just using 1, to also rotate. We tell our members to do that too, that if you're going to use a particular pesticide, rotate after a while so that they don't develop that resistance to that particular chemical. So anyway, so that's out there. So definitely that's something you can look. I actually printed that out and actually have it in my greenhouse as a good reference sheet. So moving on, I'd like to talk about scale. On the website, they have these great pictures, not only just here, but if you were to click on view more images, you will get all the various images that are out there for scale. So for scale.
Excuse me, Mei-Ling. I just want to butt in here since I already have. If you're not speaking, if you would be kind enough to mute yourself, it would really cut down on the, and I can't mute people because I'm not the host anymore. So please manage your microphones. Thank you. Sorry.
So I'm going to click on the source image. So this is a great picture of a severe infestation of scale. A lot of the pests that we're talking about today, they're all considered sucking insects in the sense that they bite into the plant tissue and extract the juices out of the plant, which obviously after a while of being subjected to this will get a yellowing of the leaf, basically a chlorotic spotting. And if it's continued to happen, you can eventually lose the leaf and eventually lose the plant. So that's one of the reasons why you want to show that. There are different varieties of scale that's out there. What's showing is the white Bois-Duval scale. And let me show you another one. Oh, yes. There was a good picture. This is a great picture. This is also a white voice of all scale, but one of the things that the female will do is they will lay eggs under a circular shell. So if you see the shell like that, that's basically indicating there's some eggs underneath it. But a lot scales are sneaky in the sense that they will go and find every nook and cranny. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're trying to treat your plants. So hard scale on a Phalaenopsis, they're essentially like have this brown armored scale, and the scale actually lives underneath, and they are pretty crispy if you tried to actually popping one of these off, which I have done in the past, as I've been fortunate enough to get hard scale before. And then we have a soft brown scale. That's shown on the back of a Phalaenopsis flower. Now, one of the things about soft brown scale is that they will excrete honeydew as a byproduct of what they do. So if you do happen to see ants present on your plants or in your greenhouse area, please know that some of these pests actually do produce this honeydew, and the ants are also attracted to this honeydew. And along with the honeydew, apparently there's a phenomenon called sooty mold that can also develop with that, and that's actually a black mold, and where the spores actually will find the honeydew and use the honeydew as a nutrient source. So you can actually have additional issues develop with this presence of the honeydew around. Okay, so treatment. Obviously, on the website, they suggest obviously a few of the things, but they also suggest that you can also spot treat if your collection is small enough and you only have a couple plants to actually do. And they suggest a spot treat using isopropyl alcohol. And they suggest using a Q-tip. I personally use like a very soft toothbrush so that I can get into all those nooks and crannies, such as like getting into the leaves, axils, and the shafts in those particular areas. I've also have done a spray of spraying the plant with alcohol. The only thing is I've noticed that if you are to spray the plant, it's always still good to follow up with the cleaning so that when you have to look for additional infestation, you're not looking at the residual dead scale from the past and wondering, is that new versus old? Definitely a cleanup is recommended as well. One of the things also is, particularly in Cattleyas or any type of plant that produces a sheath, it's recommended to also pull back those sheaths and to check under those areas too, because scale will also migrate into all of those little areas. And if you're spraying or wiping things down, some of those areas would not be captured. And so be mindful to be able to take those sheaths off and also to clean and apply the pesticides in those areas as well. Okay. All right, so the next guy I wanted to talk about is mealybugs. So I'm going to go over to the mealybug pictures. So mealybugs are also a sucking insect, so you're going to see some of the same phenomenon of like yellowing of the leaves and everything like that if the infestation is a little too severe. They're a larger bug, so you can actually see the individual bugs as well. And you'll find these guys actually in every part of the plant, anywhere from the flowers, but also in many of the hidden areas under leaves and between the leaves and the stems of the plants. If you have a lot of them, they will appear as a cottony mass, such as you would find here like on a dendrobium. But see, as you see, all into the nooks and crannies. So cleaning one of these guys is something you have to really get to. Now, what's not mentioned under the mealybug section, I noticed is, but it's mentioned in another part of the website, is that mealybugs also secrete honeydew as a byproduct. And so along with scale, mealybugs to do the honeydew. And so yet again, if you see ants, then you could possibly also have an infestation of mealybugs. But yep, also look for the ants, and also you'd have to take care of the possibility of a sooty mold too. So those are two other aftermaths of having these pests in your collection. One other thing that should be mentioned is that mealybugs do also like to go into the potting mix. And so if you are treating for mealybugs, be mindful to also check out the potting mix. So you might also want to look into a pesticide that you can drench the whole plant and the potting mix in to try to mitigate any mealybugs that are in your potting mix as well. So treatment, it's actually, they mentioned the same type of.
Okay, just a minute.
Oh, was that for me or somebody just talking?
Just a minute.
You're good. It was accidental.
Okay, all right, because they said it twice. Anyway, like the scale, the treatment that's mentioned on this website is pretty much the same. Using a Q-tip for the isopropyl alcohol or a toothbrush, in addition, or a pesticide as well. They also mention, which is a great thing to also get into, is doing a repeat application about 2 weeks later, because you get the adults with the first application, but you can also have an additional infestation by like what eggs and what youth that develop after your first application. And so they also suggest the application. It's always good to know what the life cycle is of the pest you're dealing with, because obviously they all mature at different rates. So for mealybugs, they suggest to apply the application 2 weeks later. And again, remove all those old leaves and flower sheaths to keep that hygiene together. So moving along, am I talking too fast? Because I've noticed I'm going back through these pretty quickly.
I think you're doing fine, and that will leave. I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of questions.
Oh yes, and I'm definitely, you know, seeing the group that we have. There's a lot of people with experience, so they can also partake in some of the, you know, sharing of their experiences. So thrips, they can be pretty nasty. One of the things that they are is that they are an extremely small pest. Hang on. Okay, I'm back. So they're an extremely small pest, and they can be as small as 1 millimeter. So they're one of the harder pests to find, but you can certainly see the kind of damage that they create. Thrips like to hang out on the flowers. And so if over time you can get quite a bit of flower damage with them, like you can see here, this flower has been pretty decimated, and it's just looking kind of crispy because all of the juices have been kind of sucked out of the plant because of the thrips. One of the things about thrips is that they're dangerous in the sense that they can transmit a plant disease or a virus from one plant to another, because they do have wings, and if they bite and puncture a plant that has a virus and then they go to another plant, then they can transmit that virus to this other plant. So that's kind of one of those things you want to make sure that you keep in check if you do discover thrips in your collection. Like I said, they're typically found on the flower and buds, and there are times you will actually might find that you have a plant that has bud blast, where you've had this spike of flowers, but all of a sudden they die off. One of the things could be, in addition to just environmental factors that can cause a bud blast or a spike 2 blast, is that thrips can also attack the whole spike and also decimate the spike. So that's also one of those things that can happen. I've usually have seen thrips damage by having the flower look deformed. And so here they say that it makes it look a little bit like water-soaked edges or water damage on a flower. To me, it's always looked just more like a deformed flower that has occurred. And all of that could be just from the thrips checking out your flowers. So they also attack leaves. And so if you have a leaf issue, you are going to get, the caloric spotting. Your leaf, the leaf damage can also appear pitted, stippled, and you can also end up with a silvery or even a bleached looking leaf. So there's actually quite a few symptoms that come along with having a thrip damage on your plants. So one thing I've heard about thrips is that they are very difficult to treat because they're one of those that are do develop a good resistance to pesticides. And of course, the fact that the size of them is also very small. So like Rob had mentioned earlier of, if you're doing a pesticide, maybe doing 2 pesticides with different modes of action. This would be one great example of why you would want to do that. And of course, one of the things that thrips have a tendency to do is when the females go to lay their eggs, they actually will implant their eggs in the plant material. They don't lay them on top like scales do. And so one of the things that if you've had a flower infestation, if the thrips are on your flowers, you might want to remove the flowers because there's a quite high possibility that those eggs are somewhere in that flower material. And the thing is that the eggs can take anywhere from 2 to 14 days to hatch, depending on the temperature. And so they can hang out for a while before they show up. And so once again, a repeat application of the pesticide is recommended. On St. Augustine's website, I think they mention, let's see, where is it? Here we go. For severe infestations, apply the chemicals twice a week for 3 weeks. So that's their recommendations for how long you should continue to do the pesticide application to mitigate and get rid of your thrips. Okay. One thing I didn't mention earlier is that on the website they have all these great links. So if, in addition to what's already written out, they have all of these other great links that you can go to with other informations about the particular topic. So if you wanted to read more about that particular pest, you can also check out those particular links. Okay, so let's go to mites.
Hey, Maylin, this is Pete.
Yeah.
I had thrips, not this past winter, but the winter before. Those blue sticky cardboards that you can hang in your greenhouse or wherever are an excellent attractor to thrips. So if you have them flying around your greenhouse, that's a great way of finding out whether it's actually thrips or something else if you can't see them.
Okay, great. Thank you. That is a great idea.
Another way to see the thrips is to very gently breathe on a flower. If you think there's thrips there, and the carbon, what I've heard is that the carbon dioxide in your breath makes them move. They're really small. You can't really see them, but if they're moving, you can see them because your eyes are really good at tracking movement. Well, most people's eyes are better at tracking movement. I don't know if my eyes can see them anymore.
There's one other thing, a greenhouse, a commercial greenhouse person told me that if you take a green bean plant and you grow them alongside, say, your cattleyas, which these are susceptible to, they will have a tendency of drawing the strips away. And I have a pot of Kentucky Wonders out there, that a vine, and then I also have it inundated with systemic pesticide. So if they do hit there, you got a shot that's going to kill them.
Just don't eat the beans.
No, no, don't eat the beans. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Don't eat the beans after that. But yeah, that makes sense. Kind of a sacrificial plant in a sense, right? As long as you have a good collection of pea plants so that they keep growing, right? Okay, so mites. You know, all of the pests that we've been talking about have been considered insects. But mites are actually not considered an insects. They actually are part of the arachnid family. And of course, whenever we talk about mites, we talk about spider mites always come to mind. You know, I kind of lump everything into spider mites. But one of the things I have to say is that all mites are not spider mites. There's actually different varieties of them out there. So spider mites are actually only one of several type of mites that apparently infect orchids on a normal basis. So the spider mites are one of those that are also very tiny to see. It's one of those that if you're going to try to find them, you probably are going to need a magnifying glass. You're typically are going to see the damage that's done from them before you find the mites, unless you see spider web along with the spider mites, right? So mites typically like to feed on the underside of the leaves and everything. The upper surface of these sometimes will end up with a silvery effect. And so because they do like to suck the plant juices out of the plants like all these other pests that we've been talking about, you also are going to see some streaking, some stippling, as well as some chlorotic spotting as well. This is basically a Phalaenopsis mite, which is one of those varieties, obviously, because this is a Phalaenopsis leaf. And we'll talk about that in a bit, because I know that that has been a very popular conversation. So here's another top leaf of a Phalaenopsis showing some of the pockmarks from the effects of the mites. Whoops, sorry. My computer is zooming out on me. We're in. So let me mention the main varieties while I'm at it. So we have, as we know, like I mentioned, the spider mites. Those are typically red in appearance and will produce a webbing. There are broad mites, and then there is the flat mite. And the flat mite actually also includes the family of the Phalaenopsis mite. When it comes to the different mites. Now, one of the things, see this is right here, the fault or false spider mite comes from this particular family. And so that's where the Phalaenopsis mites come from. So one of the things they mentioned about treating, and Dave and I have been having a conversation on this because we have been receiving quite a few questions on mites on Phalaenopsis. So one of the things about Phalaenopsis mites is that not all pesticides apparently will work for trying to mitigate a Phalaenopsis mite, but some of the commercial growers that have had to deal with the Phalaenopsis mite has actually found that just using isopropyl alcohol actually is effective towards getting rid of these phale mites. The thing that becomes problematic with it is that the leaves that are damaged by this infestation, they recommend that they should be removed because of the fact that typically what happens is that the mites leave behind a bacterial infection, which can then spread to the rest of the plant. And so with that, they suggest that the leaves be removed after that so that you can try to stop that bacterial infection from spreading. Now, in addition to some of the other pesticides that are out there, the St. Augustine website actually has some home remedies here. And so they suggest some of the remedies of like using this one right here,
Right.
where they mention a 1 part rubbing alcohol to 1 part 409 or Murphy's oil soap. I have to admit that this must be a Florida thing, because this is something I actually had heard of when I was growing up in Florida, and they suggested using this mix. So I have used this mix of doing the alcohol 409 and actually and the 2 parts water, putting that in a spray bottle and spraying the plants. Another home remedy that they suggest is doing this 2% solution of Johnson's baby oil with some Palmolive detergent in it. So that's another option available, in addition to the plethora of miticides that are out there that we can get out on the market.
There's also Castile soap.
Yeah.
Is probably your best bet, and sometimes you can get them that smell nice. So like get them with the spearmint smell or something like that. So I use Castile soap. You can get a quart of it for $7 or $8 at Meyer or wherever.
Okay. Now, has anybody else have they heard of the rubbing alcohol and 409 and water mixture? Yep. You have? And because I have had questions before about like, well, instead of using 409, we use Simple Green? And I have never tried using Simple Green. So I wanted to ask if anybody else have tried using Simple Green as a substitute.
I've used Windex before.
Maybe it's very popular in the Naples area, Mylene.
Huh? Say that again?
Using Simple Green is very popular in the Naples, Florida area.
Okay. All right.
And people reported wonderful success using it. But I myself have never tried it.
All right. Yeah, see, I haven't tried it either, but I guess one of the advantages of Simple Green is that it's more environmentally friendly, and so that it breaks down easier, supposedly, compared to the 409. Right. And so, yeah, that's why it was one of those things I wanted to ask, because like everybody else, I'm still learning too. And so it's great to hear what everybody else has also tried. Okay, so like the website says right here, you do need a repeat application of whatever you choose to use to mitigate your miticide. So new generations mature every 6 days. And so you're going to be spraying for a little bit because they suggest 3 applications at 4-day intervals to try to get all of the additional generations that actually pop up afterwards. Okay. So thanks for that discussion, guys, on that. That's great. So aphids, they really do not have a separate web page on this. And let me see if I can zoom up on this so you can see this. So aphids are a little larger in size, so you should be able to see them fairly easily on your plants. And yeah, aphids I've seen have do appear to like to hang out on the flowers, on buds, and on the newer growths of a plant. Now, if you see in this picture, there's some ants that are also hanging out. And so sure enough, aphids also excrete honeydew. And so that's one of those things that, that you also will probably also have to address is the ant population that ends up showing up in your collection as well. One of the other things that aphids can travel, so yet again, like some of the other plants, some of the other ones, oops, I lost it. You would also have to worry about aphids can travel from one plant to another, so they can also transmit diseases and viruses as well. So that's kind of one of those things, if you see them in your collection, you might want to get to them as soon as possible.
Usually for aphids, I've found that if you control the ants, you can control the aphids. So it's a little easier to put down some ant bait or some ant traps. And then you can actually just hit the aphids with some water. They'll wash right off. I've never found aphids to be that much of a problem. My problem is that I grow under those purple lights. I can't see them. And they're invisible like Wonder Woman's plane.
Yeah, and the treatment that they suggest is to wash away the plant with a jet of water. So that kind of says it. Here's an interesting tidbit about aphids, and I don't know if it was Rob, I don't know if it was you that mentioned it to me, and I looked it up to verify it. But one of the scary things about aphids is that female aphids actually give birth to their newborn. They don't actually hatch eggs. And so the aphids actually will give birth, and they can actually birth up to 100 a day. But what's even scarier about this is that all of the female newborns can actually be born already pregnant. And so so within a few days, they're already giving birth to additional pests. So I was that just kind of blows my mind that actually that can happen. But just thought I would share that little tidbit of information there. So once again, the application of the treatment, as you probably would also want to repeat your pesticide or whatever that you're going to do to repeat your application 2 weeks later, so that you capture any subsequent generations of aphids, of aphids.
I had a Stelis, I think it was Argentata, that the aphids really liked. So in the greenhouse, if I was going to have aphids, they'd be on the Stelis. So it was a good indicator plant for me to watch.
Wow. Sort of like the pea plant, right? All right, so the few other pests I wanted to just kind of show, just briefly go over. They mentioned white flies. From there, they could just mention just spraying with the standard pesticides and repeating on a 4-day interval for white flies.
Has anybody ever actually found white flies in their collection?
I have not.
Yes, I have. In the greenhouse when my mother was alive, she liked tomatoes. So during the winter, I would be growing tomato plants, and I will guarantee you will have white fly.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're not growing, if you're growing tomatoes, and evidently if you're growing marijuana, they really like white flies. I don't grow either of those, so I've never had a problem.
I had my son's tropical plants for the winter, and the bananas brought in white flies, and I had all winter I was fighting them.
No, I had white flies in the greenhouse on the tomatoes, but I never had any problems with the orchids per se. I didn't see where they inundated any of the orchids. But
okay.
We had whiteflies at a show in Cincinnati at the place we were, and it was so bad that Donna Herrig actually broke down and cried. And we had to treat all the plants when we got home.
Wow. Yeah, that's one of those great learning moments of why you should definitely clean your plants and make sure they're pest free before they go to a show. Okay, the next one they brought up is snails and slugs. So yeah, I know I've had plenty of snails and slugs show up in my greenhouse. And I'm sure you have too. They mentioned about chemical baits. They also have suggested, I remember hearing this about using diatomaceous earth. Like for instance, I remember there was one nursery where they actually had put a layer of diatomaceous earth around their greenhouse so that the snails and slugs, if they tried crossing over that layer, the diatomaceous earth is very sharp, and so it basically ends up cutting them, and that ends up killing them. There's the old house remedy of using beer in shallow tins. in your growing area because the beer apparently attracts them as well. But there's also other chemicals out there, like I've seen Sluggo. It's like a slug bait that's like a pellet form that you can just sprinkle down on your, on your surfaces in your growing area, and will also help get rid of them.
You
The
don't
new
want to
Sluggo.
use that if you have pets.
The new
Right.
Sluggo is relatively safe for pests. It's iron phosphate.
Is it? Good.
Yeah, the old Sluggo, which you can't, I
Yeah.
have a lot of it, but you can't buy it anymore, I don't think, had metaldehyde in it, which was very dangerous for
Right. Good
dogs
point. Yeah.
especially.
Yeah.
I've had good luck in terrariums by using romaine lettuce leaves. So if you put a few lettuce leaves around your collection, the snails and the slugs will get on the lettuce leaf, and then you can pick them off the lettuce leaf. They love lettuce more than life.
Huh. I'll have to try that.
I think you've got to draw your line when you have to share your beer with the slugs.
That's for that natural light or whatever. That's what it's good for.
Yeah, you don't have to get the good beer for that.
Just buy NA beer. It'll be fine. You won't drink that anyhow.
Yeah, we just want to get the slugs drunk. That's all. Oh gosh. See, we're pretty much almost close. The rest of the pests that they mention on this website, they have caterpillars, ants, cockroaches, and grasshoppers. And they're all really more pests that start chewing and biting off parts of your plants and everything. And so I don't know if Dave, it's already been 38 minutes into my presentation. I don't know if you guys would like me to continue with these, but ants, they mentioned just the standard using liquid 7, particularly if you're outdoors. Now I know with all of us, if you put your orchids outdoors for the summer, they suggest that maybe dunking your plants in a bucket of water before you bring them in for the winter kind of thing, because if you've got ants, they actually will crawl up to the surface and onto the top of the water, so you know for sure that you don't have ants being brought into your house kind of deal. Cockroaches and grasshoppers, I don't know about you, but Florida has not only cockroaches, but they also have palmetto bugs, and they look more like this. And fortunately, we don't get palmetto bugs here. Palmetto bugs are like 2 inches long and just really unpleasant creatures. So anyway, but they mention about using a paste of boric acid and sugar as a simple fix for getting rid of the roaches. And that is the end of the orchid pests section. Are there any questions or anything that everyone might have?
I
Has
would like to.
anybody had problems with stink bugs?
I haven't. Is anybody else on the?
I'm sorry, did you say stink bugs, Dot?
Yeah, right. They get into my greenhouse, and I think.
Has anyone ever tried neem oil?
Which oil?
Neem oil to control insects.
I know.
I would
there's
say it doesn't work well for me.
And I am not bothered by insects at all anymore.
Okay. Yeah, I know that a lot of the Grand Valley Orchid Society group likes to do more of organic type pest management. And so a lot of the pesticidal soaps, in addition to the neem oils, are used, and I think the action supposedly is that, like with the oils and the soap, it kind of supposed to suffocate the insect. So it's one of those that it suffocates, and it's not a systemic. So that's one thing you have to remember about using those particular type of products. But yeah, if you want to be more organic and be safer on the environment, that kind of thing, a lot of our members use those type of approaches. I personally don't use neem oil because I have had the problem of using the oil and it turns out to be a sunny day. And so, you always hear about be careful if you're going to use neem oil on a collection that's going to be outside, because it can act like you can sunburn your plants because essentially it magnifies the sun and everything like
Right, right.
And the neem oil is of varying quality. I think that good quality neem oil is effective, but there's a lot of not good stuff on the internet. So I would just use like a dormant oil or an ultrafine oil. I think you might get the same effect as the neem oil.
Yeah, I've heard one nursery out of Chicago. I won't name names just to be safe, but I've heard that what they would use was like palm olive detergent or a similar dishwashing detergent mixed in with like a vegetable oil, and then spray and then blend it with water, and they use that as their application for keeping the bugs down in their greenhouse. And they liked it because it helped keep the plants nice and shiny as well, but it also helped mitigate the pests in their greenhouse. So for those who have had commercial greenhouses, I don't know if anyone else have tried.
Well, there is one thing I want to bring up that's very, very, very important. We talked about pesticides. We talked about all of the stuff here on how to control bugs. One of the things you must do is protect yourself, and you must protect your environment. For example, I have a greenhouse, and it's a big greenhouse. So for me to go into that greenhouse and spray, I've got to have a respirator. I've got to have outer outfit that I can go straight to the laundry and wash it when I'm done, and gloves and the whole works. You can't fool around with this stuff. If you have plants in the house and you want to do something with it, like I got plants in the house I sprayed the other day, I take all the plants outside, spray them, make sure they're dry before you bring them back inside, but don't do this stuff inside a closed environment because this stuff is not, you can't fool around with it.
That is a very good point. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the reasons why, at least for the Grand Valley group, they go to the other more organic and more gentle approaches, because we have a large group that have home collections where they are not growing in a greenhouse. And so, you know, they're in the house, they're growing on windowsills or they're under lights. And so that's the approach that they've been doing. Okay. Great. I'm going to mute myself now. And Dave, do I need to somehow switch you back to host?
Yeah.
How do I do that?
Give me back hostmanship.
How do I do that?
Click on his name.
Click right on my photo and you should be able to send it back to me. Because that's how I gave it to you.
Got it.
Great.
You're in charge.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody for listening to me chat about pests today.
All right. We're perfectly on time right now. And so I'm going to grant everyone a 5-minute pee or food break. And Rob is going to start promptly at 12 o'clock. So you can stay and chat. The mics are open if you like, or you can vacate the video and do whatever you need to do. And then we'll start back up. Okay, our next speaker is going to be Rob Halgren, and we're going back out to St. Augustine Orchid Society website, and he's going to be talking about diseases, maybe some environmental if he has time. He's in charge of that. I do have a handout to give to everyone, which I have to figure out. I think I can make it available for everyone to download on the session, and you can feel free to distribute the information. There's some links, gives you some AOS information about things that we've talked about today, and it might be helpful to your members who did it. Go ahead, Rob.
Am I a host now?
No, of course not. All right, so let me get back over here. Where are you in my picture frame here? Where is Rob?
I'm at the top of my screen.
Oh, I know. You were at the top of mine, and now everybody's all. Oh, there you are.
Look for the
Mute. That's what
waterfall.
I'm going to mute. I'm going to mute you. One thing I could do is make you a host. I don't know how to. Greg, Rob, you guys know how to co-host on the fly?
Just make me a host. That's fine.
Wait, let me try one other thing here, just for point of record. And maybe I can go back into the meeting. I'm not going to mess around with this. I'm going to give this to you, Rob. So as soon as I find you again, there you are. All right. There you go.
Cool. Let's see. What I am going to suggest is that I'm going to offer you a new option. So there's actually a raise hand feature. If you hover over your icon, your thing, you can raise your hand. And I'm going to suggest that everyone goes on mute. I'm going to put everyone on mute that's not on mute. And if you want to talk, raise your hand and I will unmute you. Or you might be able to unmute yourself, but you'll actually have to. There we go. Just because that background noise is getting crazy. Okay. Did I get everybody? I think I got everybody. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen too if I can figure out how to do it. Normally I'm not sharing my screen in these meetings. Share screen. And hang on. Oh, you know what I did? I deleted the website. Hang on, I'm getting there. Sorry. I was all excited about being in charge and then I just screwing it up. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. Share my screen. Why can't I share my screen? Cancel. Try again. Share screen. There we go. Share. Okay. So this is a slightly, can you see my screen? I think you can. So this is a slightly different version of the St. Augustine website, and you can see a lot of the same information. I just wanted to talk a little bit about things that aren't bugs. On the bug portion, Dot asked about stink bugs. I don't know if I've seen stink bugs inside. I don't know that I've seen them chewing on any plants. I'm not sure I'm worried about that. I know that if you put down some like cardboard, like make a stack of cardboard, the stink bugs will go underneath the cardboard and you might be able to trap them that way and get them outside. Kind of like slugs and snails.
Rob, I
Yeah.
looked up stink bugs on during the little break that we had, and it said that they do chew on leaves and stems of ornamental plants if they don't have fruit and other things to eat.
Yeah,
So
I think
I have noticed some damage from them in my greenhouse.
yeah, I think they're an invasive species. We didn't really have them
Right.
like 10 years ago. I never remember seeing any stink bugs, and
Yep.
so I'm not sure. To me, they're just annoying. I haven't really noticed any damage, but maybe I'm getting enough damage from other things that I don't notice the stink bugs. Also, just as a caution, so for biochemical reasons, insecticides, a lot of those classes of insecticides are relatively safe for mammals. For humans, that's just some of them. Now, not all of them. Don't just assume all of them are safe, but most of them are relatively safe. When we start talking about fungicides and if we wanted to cure fungal problems, there are really strong biochemical reasons why it's actually very hard to treat fungi and not mess up mammals. So a lot of the fungicides are pretty toxic to pretty much everything. So I know that this website recommends using certain fungicides. I personally don't like to use any fungicides just because of the toxicity. I prefer to address this by other means. Okay, so here they've got some fungal rots, leaf spots. And you can try to identify what your problem is, but with a lot of these fungal diseases and bacterial diseases, by the time you've identified what it is, your plant's already dead. So sometimes it's best to act first and then worry about identifying things later. All right, so let me move that window out of the way. So for example, here we've got Erwinia. Now, people have heard of Erwinia. I don't know if anybody has ever seen it or seen it in time to save a plant. So here's a little soft, kind of mushy area on a plant, and it usually smells pretty bad. I've always smelled it before I've actually seen it. By the time a leaf looks like this, that plant is pretty close to being dead, in my opinion, my experience. I would definitely remove this plant from the collection, get it out away from everything else before I did anything else. I wouldn't start cutting on that plant on the bench or, doing any watering or anything. I would move that plant out of the way. It's a killer, and it'll spread through your plants like wildfire once it gets established.
Rob, this is Dave.
Yeah.
I have personal experience with this where you definitely need to cut out the bad tissue and leave healthy tissue there. That's for sure. Even if it's in a prominent leaf, but
Cut it
I
right
have
there.
had success. Yeah, excise it there, and it might be painful. So you have to ask yourself the question: how important is this plant to wait another year just to see if it's still alive?
If it's a supermarket special.
What's that?
If it's a supermarket special, you just go to the supermarket and get yourself another one.
And the one at the supermarket already has flowers. But what I'll do after that is I'll wet the surface there, the remaining surface, and I will douse it in cinnamon. And I'll leave the cinnamon there for 6 months. And
Yeah,
it'll dry up rots.
Yeah, I use a lot of cinnamon.
Well, cinnamon is pretty, actually, it's hard, I hate to say it this way, but cinnamon is cheaper than supermarket fowls. Anyhow, that's my point.
In here, this is again, I'm not a foul person. I have a few Phalaenopsis, but once this plant is dead, this plant can't be saved. Look at how deep into the crown that rot is. You're just gonna give yourself grief if you try to save that. This I have seen a lot on Paphiopedilums, this little brown divot here. And there's a few things that can do that. On the paths, it doesn't seem to spread as fast as in Phalaenopsis. So sometimes, if it does this and it's reasonably dry or totally dry, I might just sprinkle some cinnamon on it just in case and then let it go. I might leave that leaf. I'd definitely keep an eye on the plant. If it looks like it's spreading at all, then I would take that leaf off. Once it gets into the rhizome, into the stem of the plant, then the plant is toast. You might as well just throw it out. You're good. Again, it's usually the one you just paid $100 for that happens to. Okay, here's another, and you'll see it. It'll look mushy and it'll smell bad. Okay, here we got some brown spot. Now again, what is this? So you can see this. I think there's probably a few things that can cause that kind of spotting on a leaf. Now, if I saw that on a lady slipper, I might not be too worried about it. On the Phalaenopsis, I might be more worried about it. But this isn't going to spread nearly as fast as that bacterial Erwinia rot. In fact, you might just be able to sprinkle some cinnamon on that. Okay, now it's got Phizan. I don't honestly, maybe you guys have experience with Phizan. I've used it. I don't think it cures anything. I think it will prevent more infection later, but I don't think it's going to get into a plant and cure a plant of a disease, in my experience. The only thing I use Phizan for these days is I will put a little bit into my fertilizer concentrate tank so that I don't get things growing in my concentrate. So I'll just put a little bit in there, and then that concentrate is pretty good for the rest of the time I've got. It takes me 6 months to work through a concentrate tank. So I'll use the Physan for that. In fact, I need to get some more. Copper worries me a lot. I think too much copper is toxic to a lot of plants, and I would be worried about putting that on orchids in general. Okay, here's another kind of rot here where you just lost this whole lead on Cattleya. Again, it's going to be soft. It's going to be oozy. You got to get that growth off and sprinkle it with some cinnamon. Here's a little bit of this going at the base. Now can be confused. You might see a discoloration. It might not be quite this color. It might be more yellow. You see this discoloration. You think it's a rot. You turn this plant around and you'll see it's infested with Vaudeville scale here in this axle. So you need to be a little careful about identifying things. For mealybugs, I'll tell you, I've been growing for, I don't know, 20 years. And I had these plants, and they were Armeniacum and Armeniacum hybrids, and they kept losing leaves. And I kept thinking, oh, what's wrong? They got some fungal infection, something's going on. And finally, I repotted them, and I learned that they had mealybugs. I just couldn't see the mealybugs, so they were in the roots. So a lot of things that you see, these discolorations and losing of leaves, could be animal pests or they could be bacterial pests, and you really have to figure out which is which before you can solve the problem. If you get rot into the stem like this, there might be some good growths back here. You need to cut off as much of this as you can until you get back into clean tissue. Sterilize your pruning tool in between each cut, right? If you cut once and you're still in the bad material, you got to immediately sterilize your tool. Otherwise, you're just moving the bacterial spores and the fungal spores around. You got to go sterilize again and then try another cut.
Where are you?
Yeah, just a second. Why is this not? There we go. Okay, Fusarium wilt is the only one you can really identify easily because you'll see a red, pink ring in the stolon. Again, once this gets in, unless this plant is extremely valuable to you, you can try cutting it back and cutting it back and cutting it back, but eventually you're going to run out of plant. It's not gonna do well for you. So what do you do, right? We just terrified everyone with these rots and these things. I honestly don't see these rots very often. I don't know how many of you have a problem with fungus and bacterial rots. Cassandra does.
Yeah.
I don't think I used Captan like when you could, which must have been, I don't know what, they took it off the market. I think they took it off the market like 25 years ago. I haven't used a fungicide routinely since. The only fungicide I use is cinnamon, and I don't use any of the other fungicides. Again, I have a too much biochemistry degree to really trust any fungicide and my own safety. So I don't use the fungicides. I've found that the way to minimize that is to change your culture. So for example, this plant, which they're saying has got collar rot, you look down here at the base, this media looks really, really wet. And it looks a little slimy. It's got a little green algae growing on it. I think this plant is probably just being kept too wet. If they were to water it one day, maybe instead of every 3 days, maybe water it every 5 days, I bet it would look better and it would grow better. Also, more air movement. If you get some air movement around you, or even if you are growing wet, the surfaces will stay drier and you won't get as much invasion by fungi. I have on the advice of Fred Clark, he came out, I don't know when it was, 3 or 4 years ago now, and we visited my little barn with my plants in it. And he saw my big 1,000-gallon water tank, and the first thing he said is, "Are you aerating that water tank?" I said, "Nope." And he says, "You need to get an aerator in there, and you need to bubble some air through that water tank." So I went out and I found the biggest aerator I could. It's a pond aerator. It's, I don't know, got a disc about that big on it and a good size pump. And I'm blowing air through that 24 hours a day. It's pretty cheap pump to run. It's not drawing a lot of watts. It does. I have had to replace the aerator once because it plugged up, and so there's a little expense there. I don't know. So one of the things with one of my classes is I take them to the wastewater treatment plant as a field trip. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to a wastewater treatment plant, but one of the things they do is they run the sewage through a big tank and they bubble air through it like crazy. They're putting tons and tons of air through that mixture. And what it does is it helps the bacteria and other things in the sewage get enough oxygen to break down the material in the waste. And they say that they're running so much air through it that if a duck lands on the surface, because the ducks sometimes think it's water and they'll land on the surface, the duck just sinks. So the density of the water is so low that the duck will drown in the water because it can't float. There's that much air moving through the system. Now, I don't know if I'm running that much air through my water tank, but I'm running a lot of air through my water tank. And I bet ducks wouldn't float in my tank, not that they're going to be able to get in. And I have found that over the last several years since I've done that, I never saw a lot of rot before, but my plants look better and I think they're growing better with the air in the water. So if you have the means, if you're storing water in a tank, I would very strongly recommend getting some sort of aeration in there. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised by how well it works. It is so cheap and it's non-chemical, it's perfectly safe. Now, some people you'll hear people using hydrogen peroxide in their water supply. So I don't know what the amount is. Put some hydrogen peroxide in your water. I don't see why that wouldn't work, but I think the air pump aerator is going to work a lot better for increasing the oxygen level in your water. And then the orchid roots need air too. They need oxygen. So by oxygenating the water, I think that helps the wet potting mix a little bit. So that would be my suggestion for fungal diseases. Try to aerate your water. I think we've all seen this in an oncidium leaf. The end of it leaf burns off. Is this a problem? I mean, it's obviously that you're not going to get a CCM on a plant if it's got that kind of leaf tip burn. In general, it's kind of a self-limiting problem. I would just cut back here somewhere that leaf, and maybe if I was taking it to a show, I'd pretend to put a little point on it. It never really, no, it doesn't fool anybody, but at least it gets rid of this brown spot. Again, I'm not going to go out and buy a fungicide just because this is on a few of my oncidiums. I'm just going to trim those leaves up, and I'm just going to try to give it more air movement. This I've seen a fair amount on Cattleyas. Some people think that's a virus, and sometimes it probably is. And I learned, actually, I learned from this website that it was a fungal infection. I don't know. I generally throw out plants if they tend to do this. I don't have time or patience or space to grow plants that are fussy. So if they're going to be prone to a spotting condition like this, unless it's an heirloom plant that I can't get another one of, I'm probably just going to pitch it. I never see this one. I don't grow a lot of vandas either, so maybe it's just because I don't grow a lot of vandas. This, how do you say that? Guignardia, Philosticta, this streaking here. But I think that once that's in the plant, I've heard that you can't get that out either. That doesn't really matter what fungicide you use. Once it's in a plant, you're either stuck with it or you should throw the plant away. How many people have seen this on a flower? Usually right before you take it to a show, right? So you got that nice white Phalaenopsis, and 2 days before the show, it gets these little spots on it. That's a really common one. That's botrytis. You can't get rid of it. It's not like you can eliminate that from your greenhouse. I think it's floating around in the air. What you can do is lower your humidity a little bit. Usually that's going to be something that's caused by too much humidity. If your humidity is a little bit lower, your plants are going to look cleaner. This home remedy, this baking soda and water, this is what we would use on roses back when I was a rose grower. We would use baking soda. What was the other thing? Baking soda, some sort of soap, and water, and then that's what we would spray on the plant, the rose leaves and the flowers to try to keep the spotting down. And it works pretty well. But usually by the time you notice you've got spotting, it doesn't really matter what you spray with. Your flower is not really showable at that point anymore. So you need to address it before the spotting happens. So maybe if you sprayed your flower a little bit of that baking mixture right before the show, before it started to spot, you'd gain some time. I don't grow a lot of stuff that seems to be very sensitive to this, or I don't have enough humidity, or both. I don't have a lot of humidity, so perhaps I just don't see it very often. The only place I ever see this botrytis is on white Phalaenopsis, and I've got like 3 white Phalaenopsis. Okay, so here's your chart of things to use. Captan would be my first choice if you can still get it. It is reasonably safe for human condition. Well, actually, cinnamon is on the list, so cinnamon would be my first choice. Why does cinnamon work? So cinnamon works because the cinnamon tree is a tropical tree and grows in a pretty wet environment. And it has evolved compounds in its bark to keep the fungi and the other nasty things that live in that wet environment at bay. So it's actually, cinnamon is a fungicide. It's a natural plant-based fungicide and bactericide and an antibiotic. Now there's 2 kinds of cinnamon. There's like the real cinnamon, and then there's the cheap cinnamon, which is actually a different species. But as far as I know, they both contain that antifungal property to them. So part of it is that they actually have literal antifungals in them that they've evolved, and part of it is just the drying agent, the kind of because it's a dry powder. When you put that on something, it sucks the extra water out of it. You could get the same result with salt if you wanted to put salt on your mushy leaves. I think you might kill your plants because salt would get into the tissue. Don't try that. Don't do that. I just thought of that. That was a really bad idea. Don't pour salt on your mushy leaves. If you do, let me know how it turns out. Here's a bunch of very expensive things. I would, again, if you were a commercial grower, and some of you may be commercial growers, and you had a whole acre or 2 acres or 3 acres of Phalaenopsis on a bench, then you might want to invest in some of these antifungals. But as a hobby grower, I'm mostly a hobby grower. I've got a mixed collection. I don't have 6 phals sitting next to each other. Everything is kind of mixed together. Just having things in a mixed collection is a good thing, and then having a little more space and then just looking at your plants more frequently. I would rely on good old-fashioned cultural expertise over these antifungal things any day. If you're having fungal problems, you need to change how you grow. You don't need to spray these things. My suggestion. Sorry, was that a question? If it was, I couldn't hear what the question was. Viruses.
Dave, I wanted to add something.
Yeah. Raj, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to touch on what the speaker just talked about, bubbling oxygen through air stones in the water reverse osmosis tank. I'll just tell you my experience. I have a 165-gallon tank in which I collect reverse osmosis water. Basically, RO does is just reduces the total dissolved solids. And in Pittsburgh, usually I get a TDS of anywhere between 120 to 150 parts per million with the city water. And when I treat it with reverse osmosis, it goes down to less than 10 parts per million. In the RO tank, I have air stones. I have 2 or 3 air stones. And the purpose of that is to increase molecular oxygen. I mean, if you look at water, water is H2O, but O in H2O is not molecular. The amount of molecular oxygen you have is 4 parts per million. And when you bubble molecular oxygen through air bubbles, the smaller the air bubble, the better. When you pump in molecular oxygen, you increase the amount of for molecular oxygen from 4 parts per million to anywhere between 9 to 14 parts per million. And the amount of root growth you get is amazing. It's just totally an explosive growth of roots that I didn't appreciate as much as some of the visitors who came to my greenhouse and says, my heavens, you have huge roots. And I didn't know how to explain it at that point in time, but in retrospect, I believe that it contributes to a better root growth because you're supplying more molecular oxygen to the roots. Also, my RO water, after it has been it has been bubbled, there is also a heater in my reverse osmosis tank that will heat the water to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, because if you increase the temperature more than 70 degrees, then the molecular oxygen goes down. And not only that, the orchids are not very comfortable. So the ideal temperature is 68. And you can buy a heater for something like $5 or $10 from many hydroponic stores. So my water, especially in winter, is at 68 degrees. Then the reverse osmosis water passes through an ultraviolet light. There is a bulb, ultraviolet, and it passes through that. And basically it deactivates. See, when you do reverse osmosis, it does not knock off your bacteria and fungi. So when you pass that water through the ultraviolet light, it knocks off all the bacteria. And I'm not sure about the fungi, whether it does or not, but I suspect it does, but I'm not sure about the fungi, but it knocks off the bacteria, because that's one of the sterilization techniques we use also in operating rooms when I used to be in practice in Uniontown. So the basic thing is this, that the water is clear with a higher O2 content and at a right temperature. And it just causes an explosive growth of root system. And I also have had much less bacterial rot and fungal rot. Maybe I have, but I'm not sure because I'm not good at diagnosing various different kinds of fungal infections. So that is my just a little bit of a take on how to max out the benefit out of reverse osmosis water.
Yep, and so my water, I store in a 1,000-gallon tank. It's rainwater, which is pretty pure as it comes off the roof. But I agree, increasing the oxygen content. I've had a couple people ask me how I got roots on some of the plants that I've got. And I guess it's the oxygen. When I've done some hydroponics experiments where I just grow plants in just orchids, frags mostly, in just straight water without media. And those always have bubblers in them as well. They'll grow roots like crazy. Viruses, if you see a flower like this, throw your plant out. You all know that already. You can get virus tests and you can do them.
You mean the botrytis?
Oh no, this is virus here. Botrytis is just gonna mess with the flowers. I wouldn't worry too much about the botrytis. Viruses, you can get virus tests. You can buy virus tests. I generally don't try to test all my orchids because I just have so many. I don't know how much I would have to pay. for virus tests to test them all. If they look virused, I'll throw them out. If they don't look virused, I will keep them. Regardless, though, I'm going to be very careful about how I use my tools. I want to make sure my tools are clean in between each plant, because if I don't see the virus, I can still transmit it. We've all learned that, right? We're not dealing with a virus with a COVID-19. Well, we are. No, it is a virus. Why was I don't know. You'd think that I've taught microbiology enough times that I would have not screwed that up. But, just because you can't see that someone is sick doesn't mean they're not going to spread the virus to you. One thing you can do, which is actually, it took me a while to figure out how it worked, but you can dip your tools if you don't want to flame your tools, because flame is really hard on tools. You can dip your tools in milk. So get some powdered milk and make up a little solution of powdered milk every time, and then dip your tools in the powdered milk. What that's doing is, I'm pretty sure what that's doing, I know it works, but I think what it's doing is the milk proteins will actually bind to any virus particles. They basically bind and gum them up so that they're no longer infectious. It's a really cheap thing to do. It saves your tools. Just make sure you make up some new milk every day, because that's going to get pretty gross if it sits on your bench overnight.
So Rob, can you put a little more definition on dunk?
Oh, I soak them. I put them in there, and I actually usually have 2 or 3 tools, and I'll kind of rotate through them. I'll put one in, I'll pull another one out, I'll cut, I'll rotate through the tools.
So 5 or 10
to,
might be enough, right?
Oh, even a couple minutes or a minute would be enough to do that. And you can use other things too. You can buy anti-virus things. You could use bleach. Bleach is also hard on metal tools, so the milk is good. You might want to rinse them off afterwards. They might get a little stinky. Mailing asked about powdered milk, if you could use refrigerated milk. I think you could probably use refrigerated milk. Powdered milk is just easier because I don't have a refrigerator out in the barn, so I can just keep the powdered milk out there. And I don't worry too much about exact ratios. I just kind of get it close. Let's see. Calcium deficiency, you'll see burnt tips. Magnesium deficiency, you'll see what looks like burnt tips. It's really hard to tell those two apart. Best not to get to this point, so I would strongly suggest using a CalMag fertilizer every year, minimally before the growing season starts. So, maybe around Michigan, maybe in March or February. But I actually just go ahead and use it, not constantly, but I'll throw some in about once a month, and I'll put some extra calcium and magnesium in my fertilizer. I don't see a lot of this. I do see a little bit of yellowing, but if I do see any yellowing at all like this, then I know I need to go put a shot of CalMag in my fertilizer mix. There was, a few years ago, many of you probably heard, there was a big talk about using low potassium fertilizer, K-Lite. And the biochemistry behind that is that plants will pull phosphorus or potassium up into their roots preferentially over calcium and magnesium, because potassium is a limiting reagent in the rainforest. And that is probably true. So a lot of people have been using the K-Lite fertilizer. I don't know how many people out there are using K-Lite. If you do that, you probably don't need to add extra magnesium and calcium. I have kind of just moved back to the regular MSU fertilizer, and I just add more magnesium and calcium. I was seeing signs of what I looked like potassium deficiency in my plants when I was using the K-Lite, so I just moved back to the other fertilizer.
I would interject on that I was experiencing both of those situations in my water supply, my RO water. And so now I do add CalMag to my RO water tank, and I don't put it in every time, but mostly I do, because I'm a creature of habit. It's pretty much cleared up both of these circumstances for me.
So I have 2 extra things. So I've got the fertilizer concentrate that I'll just make up 30 liters at a time, because that's the size of my container, and I'll just dip it out and put it into my fertilizer injector. And then I have 2 bottles. I've got one of calcium magnesium supplement, which I get at the hydroponics store. And then I have another gallon jug of micronutrient solution, which is micronutrients, you don't need very much. It says to use like I don't remember, 1 ounce per 100 gallons or something, whatever I've got. It's amazing. So I'll just put a cap full of that in, again, once a month or once every other month. I'll put a little bit of that extra micronutrients in my fertilizer injector. Both of those are, I wouldn't say they're cheap at the hydroponics store. I think the CalMag was like $15 or $20, and the micronutrients was like $30 for a gallon. But that gallon of micronutrients is going to last me the rest of my life. It's a reasonably cheap investment. We've seen cold damage, sunburn. So you look at a plant, you see a spot like this, and you go, oh my God, is it fungal? Is it whatever? For me, my default is, did I just put it outside, or has it been a really sunny day? And I'll judge accordingly. Usually sunburn will dry up really quick. So this isn't going to be wet and oozy. It's just going to be dead and dry and papery almost. You could, in this leaf, you could punch that out. If you didn't like the look of it, you could very carefully cut it out, and now you just have a hole in the leaf with a little brown edge around it. You'd still have the rest of the leaf. One of the things I learned was not to let my wife clean the house. When I lived in Chicago, we had a little balcony, and she wanted to clean the house. I had all my seedlings in trays inside the house, and she was cleaning, so I'll just put the plants outside on the balcony and clean, and then bring them back in. Well, she left them out there for 15 or 20 minutes, and every single one of them looked like this when they came inside. So I learned not to let my wife move my plants around. That was a long time ago. She wouldn't even think about doing that now. She doesn't even look at the plants. And the last one I'm going to talk about is this tip burn here. It's a little challenging to know whether that's your lack of calcium or if it's fertilizer burn. If you see that on a phragmipedium, it's almost always fertilizer burn. So as you know, when you go to shows or your own plants, it's really hard to get a plant, especially a large plant that has perfectly green leaves all the way to the tip. And that is probably too much salt. So what happens is the salts build up in your pots as you fertilize. All fertilizers are salts. They're just going to start accumulating in your mix. They bind to the potting mix better than they bind to the water, and so they accumulate. At some point, you get to the level where there's enough salt in the water. Water wants to go to where there are salts. So if you've got enough salt in the water will stay with those salts in the potting mix, and it won't go into your plant. And at that point, I think the only solution is to repot. Now you can flush the pot with RO water. You can try to use citric acid or something to get rid of the salts in the pot. In my experience, they will work for a little while, but that's not going to get rid of the salt. The best thing to do is just repot. So for my frags, I don't let them go for more than 2 years in a pot. And if I see any sign of tip burn, I'm just going to repot. And my water is pretty good. I'm using rainwater. Mei-Ling raised your hand. How do I turn you on, Mei-Ling? I can't see you at this point.
No, I was
Sure.
just lowering my hand because you answered my question about the milk.
Oh, okay. So that gets to potting mixes. A lot of people are going to try, a lot of people like the, the Orchiata bark because it lasts forever. So supposedly it lasts for 7 years in a pot. I don't find an advantage to that because, again, mostly what I grow lady slippers, I grow phragmipediums. I do grow a few other things, in which case so I'm not so worried about salts. But for me, Orchiata in a frag pot is useless because I am not going to leave that mix in there for 3 or 4 or 5 years. I'm going to repot at most 2 years from when I put it in there. I've actually had other problems with Orchiata and seedling phragmipediums, especially where I've lost a bunch of seedlings with it. And so I've switched back to regular old-fashioned fir bark, whatever, the Sequoia brand bark, if I can get it. It just works better for me. I know for me, if I was using Orchiata and I knew that the mix would last for 7 years, that I would be very tempted to not repot. And I know I need to repot because otherwise I'll get this. That said, a lot of people won't fertilize their frags or give them very little fertilizer because they're worried about that tip burn. The best frag grower I know fertilized like nobody's business. He was using fertilizer at concentrations that I thought would kill plants. And he was able to grow the most beautiful phragmipediums, but he was watering a lot. So he would fertilize heavily and then water heavily in between fertilizings, and he was flushing that salt out. So anyway, this is probably for phragmipediums, this is you'll see this a lot more than you'll see anywhere else. I think I've used all my time as well. I don't want to talk too much longer.
Rob, while you're still positioned on that part of the information, will you slide all the way back up to the very beginning of this section to edemas, because they don't affect, but they definitely affect cattleyas, I think, and phals predominantly. And I get questions from people about edemas. So can you just talk a couple minutes about those?
You know what? I've never know. I've seen this kind of damage, but I didn't know what that was until I saw this presentation.
Oh,
it's a new one.
We get asked those questions
because I've seen this for sure. I mean, I think we probably all have seen something like this, right? I assumed that it was some other kind of damage. I wouldn't have considered edema as the answer to that. So I learned something by reading this as well.
Hi, am I unmuted?
You good?
Okay, so this has been a hard year, I know, for everybody, and I had the problems as some people heard, and the consequence of the problem in my greenhouse was by, you know, a dry greenhouse where keep 80% humidity flat there. It was terrible. So I obviously had something with the Boys Duval scale, and you can't eliminate that. I tried all the pesticides. I'm a pharmacist, so I used to come back indoors, on top to bottom by the neurological effect of the thing, and then I start crying. It was when I spoke to a colleague of ours, and she said that this is autism, corticoral, and dormant spray oil. Never put it after 70 degrees because it's a beauty. I tell what, where you see those white growth, you put it, I dilute it out and put in a spray bottle and go and wash, and say, oh, it's getting the crown, it will bot your plant. It doesn't. Absolutely stop the growth of any pest. Was the best thing, I clear totally the pests of my greenhouse, anything. However, now it's summer, you cannot do it. The beauty is it's easy for food. So do you know the tomatoes, when you get it, become all oily? Well, this. Absolutely wonderful. I use that, it stays the concentration, many times you have to do. I did that in the early. However, Rob is right. Once you see there's a disease in a particular plant, strip out the plant. Because I reported 100 plants in this epidemic. I was at home and I have time. So 4, 5, 6 hours doing plants. And basically, the roots have it. Even Boys Duval, you think that you apply the top, you do drench, you take out. No, he pot. The roots will have it and will come up as soon as the humidity levels go down, because it makes a fluff, and the fluff is spread in the greenhouse. You have funds, right? It goes. So this is something I mentioned to people out here.
So what is that? Your mic was cutting out.
Sorry?
What was it again? Your mic was cutting out. We couldn't quite hear what you were saying.
This is all seasons, horticultural, dormant
Dormant oil. Yeah, dormant oil.
Oil, and it kills any pests you have there. It's
Right.
insecticide. It has the applications, but it's temperature because that oil creates a kind of lining of oil, and nothing will stick there. It's basically make it soft any insect, and they die because they.
Yeah, they can't stick to the plants and they get smothered when they do.
Right. And for the roots, because I saw some coming back and I was reporting, I saw also in the roots. Well, the funny thing is, if you push water, you don't eliminate anything that is on the leaf. If you push ethanol, actually boys the valve make a kind of invagination and they implanted themselves in the leaf. Don't cut the leaf, your plant needs it, right? So what did I learn? I love that pink soap that's the same as the blue one has. It's washing liquid down. So the pink one is fantastic. Very little in a cotton or kitchen paper. You push it through, it eliminates all the implanted boys valve because they get implanted. And that are the females generating eggs.
The best thing is to not get Boisterval in the first place.
Well,
you
I
don't have
got
to get
a
rid of it.
plant. I got a plant and I didn't see it because obviously it was in the roof. So for mold, included the spotted rot, there is what they call Californian rot. I buy plants from the guys in California. So revitalize. This is, it has lactobacillus and working the majority of the rot, bacterial, and fungal. Well, again, like Rob, I'm a biochemist. I hate fungal products because being a pharmacist, you know, when you kill the fungus, you kill the person, right? It's the last resource because it really is aggressive. So the revitalize also from Bonide. I buy the concentrate and dilute, I pour it straight. I had a plant that had a huge rot and something new I didn't want to lose. Don't expect the leaf will go from green or from brown to green. You lost that leaf. Just get the fact. But in the rot, when I put the new leaf came out, the ground that had the rot just stayed dry, and new leaves came up. I saved several pathogens doing that.
Yeah, just don't apply the dormant oil when it's today and 95 degrees out. That would be a bad idea.
70 degrees, you are done. And if you get any heat, it's early season, right? You have to do it autumn or spring, where you can control max temperature during the day at 70. So that's my tip for the day. I saved my plants. Thank you.
Okay, I've given Dave host privileges again, and I've stopped sharing my screen because I don't want to go over our time.
No, we're right on schedule, so good job. Before I close things up here, I just want to comment about the all season because like Sandra, I am a huge proponent of all season dormant oil. I've taken, probably for the last 3 years, I've used the rubbing alcohol, water, and Formula 409 formula. But I found the 409, although it was good at cracking hard shell scale, or hard shell scale shells, to let the alcohol in that does all those little buggers. I found it was very harsh on new tissue, buds, and flowers. And so I experimented a little bit, but I now have replaced Formula 409 with all-season dormant oil spray. And there's a couple good things about that. First of all, the new all-season dormant oil spray isn't oil at all. It's a fruit tree spray, but it's water-based. It's called all season instead of dormant oil now, even though it says it on the label, because it's rated for all times of the year. So you can spray your cherry tree with it when it's dormant, when it's in bud, when it's in leaf, when it's in flower. It's rated that well. So I found that it's still a great suffocant, but it also does not damage your really tender tissues, which is where I had problems on phals and well, almost any of the orchids and frags in bud. It just, you know, the other stuff was too harsh. So take a look at that. I'm a big proponent. And the nice thing is, since it's water-based, if you pre-mix up a sprayer, it will stay dissolved until you use it all up. So I have a little presentation on that if everybody wants to know. So I've distributed out a reference sheet to all participants here, which you can download. It's called the Great Lakes Judging Center Reference, and you can feel free to grab that document and send it out in your newsletters. It summarizes where our presenters got all their information. Also, I dug up some AOS webinars, a couple books, so feel free to distribute that out through your societies. And if you can't figure out how to download this, it's not a problem. I'm not sure I have a complete list of emails of people who have attended here. So if you can't get the document, just send me an email and I'll send it back to you. We're having a little problem with the Great Lakes website, but we get squared away. I'll put it out there for us. So we got to get the share here. I'm going to share this. This is the document. I hope you guys can see this. Did it pop up for you?
Yes.
Yes.
This is the document that you can pull down. If you can't pull it down, get in touch with me and I'll give you the copy. Feel free to distribute it. It's really important for your new members too. And as Rob stated, we all learn stuff no matter how long we've been doing this. I'd also like to give very special thanks to Deb, who got the permission from St. Augustine to use their material, but also mostly to St. Augustine Orchid Society for doing such a bang up job. All we had to do is read through the stuff. So our thanks to them for doing this for the entire orchid community. And the AOS, we didn't talk about much on the AOS, but my reference sheet, there's a number of good things that people can access pretty easily. And now with the full search capabilities of Orchid magazines online, there was a wealth of information that you can find on particular topics. So with that, I'm going to vacate the meeting here. I appreciate all you guys coming, but I'm going to leave it open in case, I'm not going to close down the meeting probably for 15 or 30 minutes in case people want to stay on to try to download this document. So if you want it. So thank you all. Be safe and